Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. This week's goal, get that new engine put in this truck. I'm gonna have to remove some parts, namely the bed sides and part of the chassis to get the old engine out of the truck and the new engine installed. I've got some helping hands on their way down here, plus the family's gonna help me out. But before I do that or even get started on that part, I'm gonna jump back in the machine room and build those standoffs for the crank support that I had mentioned last week. Now for that part of the video, I thought maybe it would be kind of cool to do some point of view videoing. So I've got kind of jerried up a camera holder that I can wear on my head, and you guys can actually see what I'm seeing. Hopefully that'll turn out good. Maybe you can let me know what you think of that type of content if it all works out. So let's go dig around, see if I can find some aluminum material to build those standoffs out of and get started on this whole project. So I've got another little science experiment going on here. Obviously, this is a whole bunch of ignition components spread over the corner of the table here. This is that offset drive that I had modified last week, and I decided I better double check the rotor phasing in this thing while I have the chance and before I get it put in the engine. So I've got everything mocked up here. I've got a battery over here on the corner of the table. It's wired into an MSD 6AL ignition box and a coil, and then it is going to be triggered by the pickup and the reluctor wheel that I just put in this distributor, or this offset drive that I've turned into a distributor. Now, like I had said, this thing did not have any electronic ignition guts in it when I got it. So I've fit an MSD mag pickup in this body, and then I used the reluctor wheel. I'm gonna call it a reluctor wheel. I've used this wheel out of a factory Ford Duraspark distributor. So the way this is mounted in a Duraspark, there's little keyways you can kind of see there. I don't know if you can see them or not. And they're more of a round deal. So it's got a roll pin that goes in lengthwise in the shaft of the Duraspark and holds this in place. The shaft that was in this offset had a keyway as well, but it was a small square keyway. And I went ahead and lined the keyway of this wheel up with the keyway on the shaft, but instead of actually putting a key in there to lock it in place, I drilled and tapped one of these wheels and put a small set screw in it to lock it into that shaft. That's all in place, locked in place, and I'm very confident that it won't move. Everything's good there. The thing is, I don't know, what the relation this wheel has with the pickup that's in this distributor in correlation to the rotor in this pickup, how it fires in relation to the cap. So I'm gonna try and explain how this works, and it might be kind of drawn out, but it's really important, especially when you're firing your ignition with boost. So what is actually telling this box to fire the coil is when one of these little tangs on this wheel goes by the pickup. So it sends a signal to this box, it fires the coil sends spark to the center of the rotor in the cap. Now, if I have this wheel in the wrong relation to that pickup, it could be firing the coil when the rotor is actually between the two pins or between two plug wires. And that could be very bad. You could get cross-firing issues, and we don't want any of that. So what I've got going on here is a way that I can simulate this thing running. I will run it with my drill, and I've cut a hole in this old distributor cap, and I can actually look in there and see when that thing is firing, see when the spark is firing in relation to the pin. I'll get this all set up, and I will show you what's going on, and that way you can understand what I'm actually looking at here. Some of you might remember how I had talked about how expensive these caps are. So here I am. I went ahead and cut a big old hole in the used one so I can see what's going on. It's actually a pretty small sacrifice for how important this is. Now, if you look in the hole, you can see this pin for this plug wire, and you can see the contact down in there. Now, if I turn the distributor gear, you can see the rotor swings by, and what we're shooting for is that thing to actually spark as it passes by that pin. If my phasing was off with that reluctor wheel or the pickup or any of that, it could fire here, or it could fire clear past here. And you might get lucky and it might fire here and it'll still jump back to the pin, but that's still not optimal. As long as it's in that sweep, a guy's pretty well set. So what I'm gonna do is grab my cordless drill, give this thing some power and spin it up, and I'll show you that we can actually see spark in there. Now I just gotta give the ignition some power, keyed power, and our rotation. So what I'm looking for to start with is spark as the rotor goes across this pin. Hopefully I can get it in there to where you guys can see it. It's pretty obvious that that thing is sparking in there, And it's hard to tell where it's sparking at because the rotor's going by so fast that we can't actually see it in there. So we'll use this timing light, and I've got the timing light hooked up to the plug wire that is on this pin that we're looking at. So it's gonna fire the timing light, and it's gonna have a strobe effect to where we can actually watch that rotor in place. So I'll do that next. We should be able to see that. I've got 0 advance. We should be able to see that rotor just plain as day through that hole in the cap. Now you can see that that rotor is firing right on the leading edge of the rotor, but there's no danger of it jumping back to this pin. It doesn't look like. Obviously there's no issue over here. So now what we'll do is we'll advance the timing up to say about 30 degrees, and we'll see where that rotor is in relation to the pin at that point. And I'm gonna go ahead and do that while I'm running it. I'll just hold the advance up button and try and get it to where you guys can watch the advance come up, and you'll see that rotor walk across there. And we're just looking to make sure that that rotor is still, within working range of this pin as it goes across. That looks pretty good to me. There might be some fine tuning to be done there, but I know that I can put this thing in that new engine, in the truck, and fire it up and know that there's not an ignition issue in this unit itself. And that's pretty much gonna conclude this little experiment here. I did want to take a minute and talk about, how this might be important outside of this particular application here. The first time I've ever run into phasing the rotor with the distributor was actually when I used a crank trigger ignition. So rather than have a pickup and a reluctor wheel in the distributor, there is actually a tone ring or a reluctor wheel on the front of your crankshaft. And then your magnetic pickup is mounted on the front of the engine. And to change the timing, you actually have to move that pickup in relation to the wheel. So as your crankshaft is turning and you want to advance the timing, you would move that pickup, the opposite direction that the crankshaft is moving. That's going to signal this box to fire sooner. Now, when you do that, and it's not all one piece like this unit, as you move that pickup, it's advancing your spark or retarding your spark, whatever direction you are trying to go, but it is moving where that spark is coming off of the contact on the rotor in relation to this pin. So if you're running a crank trigger type ignition, the next step, once you set your timing, once you know this is close, you set your timing, you have to confirm that your rotor is in phase with your distributor. So that's actually more important than what I'm doing here. All I'm doing with this setup is just making sure that this is going to work as intended since I had modified it and put these guts in here. I'm just confirming my own work. There's another really pretty important place that you might need to check rotor phasing, and that is with today's computer controlled ignition. You can actually have it set up to where you're still using a distributor, but it's kind of more of a spark pointer, more or less. But it would still have a pickup in it. It would send that signal off the pickup to your computer. It's going to modify the timing, whether it's pulling timing, advancing timing, whatever it is doing, then it's going to send that signal to the box. So you need to make sure that when that computer is sending that signal out, it's still going to work in that range of the contact on your rotor in relation to this pin. So nowadays it gets less and less important because, with coil unplug technology and all of the computer controlled stuff that they're doing nowadays, the distributor itself is kind of becoming more and more phased out. But I'm just hard-headed enough to try and stick with what I know. And as irrelevant as this stuff may become over the years, Some of you might find it interesting, and some of you might even find some of this information helpful. So I just thought I'd throw it on there. Now I'm going to clean up this whole mess, get the shop straightened up a little bit, and start taking this truck apart. Well, as you can see from the time lapse, the old engine came out without much fuss, and after swapping a few parts, the new engine pretty much went right back in the truck. We did swap valve covers and the flex plate from the old engine onto this one here, and then it took a couple hours to build some new alternator mounting brackets. I had to build a new standoff and install a bigger pulley on the alternator to get the belt to clear the front crank support. Now, once that was done, I was able to bolt the alternator right back into place since it uses the same pivot point. And now we can even use the same turnbuckle to adjust the alternator belt. So all of that went together really clean. And all of the plumbing for the cooling, fuel system, and front steering hooked right back up with no trouble at all. Now, as you probably already noticed, we're still missing exhaust. My original plan was to build adapters so that I could bolt the headers that I have built for this truck onto this new engine. The problem is, those headers were built based on a big block Chevy bolt pattern that the Blue Thunder head uses. This head here uses a standard big block Ford pattern. Not only is the pattern different between the two heads, but also the angle on this mating surface is different as well. So long story short, if I were to build the adapters that I planned on building, the headers themselves actually get tipped in towards the chassis at the bottom. And that causes the header to run into this tube right here. Now, most of the adapters that I have seen, they actually face one side of the adapter and put a bit of a taper to it or an angle on it, and they match the angle between the difference in angles between the big block Ford and the big block Chevy. Now, the problem that I have is the material that I had on hand is not quite thick enough. I can put the difference in the angle in there, but I cannot space it out far enough to still clear the tube of this chassis right here and my header. So I have a couple of options. Option one, I have found a pretty reasonably priced set of fender well truck pull headers. And they look like they might bolt on and look really good on the chassis and serve their purpose and function well. So I have a set of those headers ordered, and I'm gonna try that first. If that works out, that will undoubtedly be the quickest option. Obviously, it's just a matter of bolts bolted in place. If they do fit well and everything works good, I will have to weld a couple of bungs in for my EGT probes. But the plus side of those headers working well, if they do fit and everything works perfect there, is if the truck gets wrecked, another header or another pair of headers is just a phone call away. So that's kind of why I'm looking at that option. Option number 2, if those headers do not fit or they just look like garbage on here, I have a thicker piece of aluminum coming to build adapters if I have to go that route. Option 3, if those two still do not work out, you will probably see the quickest cobbled together set of zoomies you've ever seen in your life. It's been about 4 months since I've heard anything except for my stock EcoBoost run. And as much as I like working on this stuff here in the shop, a guy's got to make his ears ring once in a while. Maybe I can get that done next days off. Hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, thanks for watching. Have a good one.